we've learned a lot in the last 2 years, and we're really excited to continue to bring, what we've learned to our work. And because I don't get to talk to you all one-on-one, sitting at my desk right now like we usually do, and I'm not teaching a mommy and me class or any of the other ways that we can communicate, it always these days has to be on Zoom. So here we are. So good for all of us for being adaptive and also taking the time out to be here, asking the husband to help put the kids to bed and do everything you needed to do to just get to this point. So thank you, Lauren and Marissa and Ellen and Angelina. You had a kiddo to get to bed. And Rachel, who is there, I think. So just being here is wonderful. Often when people do talks like this, it tends to be a little bit preaching to the choir, but you guys are wonderful parents, and hopefully Rachel's saying I'm here. Hi. Hopefully you gain some information, and also I just want everyone to get a chance to talk a little bit. So we're definitely going to have new stuff to tell you, but also we want you to feel like you could just vent if that's what you're here to do. So you know me. Not everyone knows Tatiana, so I'm going to let Tatiana introduce herself.
Hi everyone. I haven't gotten a chance to meet, I think Rachel, I haven't gotten a chance to meet you in person yet. Ellen, I don't think I've had a chance to. It's really nice to see you guys. Just to give you a little background on me, I have a background. I started off teaching in elementary school. That's what my bachelor's is in. I did that in LAUSD, Inglewood, LAUSD, Winnetka for a couple of years. And then I switched over to early childhood. I've been at university since October. And like Alana said, we're graduating our master's in, oh my gosh, a month now, which is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to being able to bring some of the information that we get to learn, because as much as it gives us the upper hand when we're in school to be able to be the experts to bring that to your children, now it's time for you guys to also try to become as knowledgeable as we are so that you can provide them similar levels of education that I think we've been able to provide, especially since this program has brought to the forefront really having science and research and education as a basis for bringing professionalism to early childhood, which, as we all know, is such an important time for our kids in terms of development. So I'm really excited to get to bring a lot of this stuff to you guys, and I miss seeing all the kids all around. And this is crazy that I have to do it this way, but hopefully one day we can do this like in person, and it can be more of a back and forth thing. But I'm looking forward to hearing what is happening in your guys' homes too, and being able to maybe problem solve what's going on with you guys. Yeah.
Great. So we have a very short little presentation of information, but most of it is kind of like a virtual cocktail hour PAL meeting talk, but we're going to share a little bit about what we talked about. Our last semester was about stress and trauma, and how appropriate, because now we're all under stress from trauma. And in our class currently, it's a research methods class, and we've gotten some really interesting research that we can use, because that's what scientists do, that they use former research to help make make plans and decide how to move forward in the future. So don't want history to repeat itself. Okay, so now I'm going to try to share my screen, which I've done like twice. And I apologize if it's... Okay, Tatiana, you're going to start, okay?
Sure.
I made it.
Did you make like a thing?
A little.
Oh, look at this.
Whoop. Okay. So we're just going to talk a little bit. And
Awesome. And then after we'll like open it up for people to just kind of chat about what's going on in your own homes, ask
Yeah.
us questions, that kind of thing.
Yes. So if
Um,
you can see the screen, great. I did a little share screen of like a 3-page presentation, but otherwise Tatiana and I are going to be speaking about what we're talking about. Tatiana, I'll start with this part, and then do you want to start off the research? Does that work for you?
sure, whatever you want. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we know that there are 3 different kinds of stress. Without getting into all of the science, because to be honest, it's hard for me to freely talk about it, but I know a guy who can. That would be my father-in-law, but I'm not paying him what he charges to talk today. But anyway, okay, sorry. 3 types of stress. And the relationships that children have with their caregivers is going to help offset stress. Not all stress is bad. You're going to have stress when you're learning something new. You're going to have stress when you fall and scrape your knee. You're going to have stress on the first day of school. Not all stress is bad. So positive stress, and you know those feelings, a brief increase in heart rate, mild elevations in your stress hormone levels, that gives you the adrenaline to take care of what you need to do. You could be stressed when you see a stranger walking down the street. That stress level is going to help you protect yourself. Then there's tolerable stress, temporary stress responses buffered by supportive relationships. So, there's going to be times in a child's life and an adult's life when there's real true stress, a broken bone, fights with friends and family. There's stress that we hope that children and us adults can bounce back from. What we really want to avoid is toxic stress. So that prolonged activation of the stress response systems with the absence of a protective relationship to help offset that negative effect, that's what toxic stress is. And that actually rewires the brain, that your body is constantly going to be in that high level of stress. Your brain is going to activate higher cortisol levels. You're going to always have your heart racing. You're not going to know how to tolerate it. Your brain is going to always be in that lower region that's just like fight or flight. You're not going to be able to use reasoning. When you're in toxic stress, you can't make high level decisions. So what we know about toddlers is that they have to learn how to go from that, caveman brain of constant stress and strife. That's why they are prone to tantrums. That's why they melt down very quickly about something that we find to be silly, because it's our job as their caregivers to bring them from a stressful situation down to understand it. And the more often that we give them those experiences of stressful situation and then working through it, a good language that we use about tantrums is you can't get someone out of a tantrum, you have to help a child work through a tantrum. So it's like a tunnel. You're not going to just teleport out of a tunnel, you're going to work your way through it. And the same is true for stress. So positive, tolerable, and toxic stress. And this gives us as adults a great opportunity to help children navigate these stresses. The way that we do that is through positive, healthy relationships with their caregivers. It's what your teachers do every day when they're with your children, to help them navigate those situations that are always going to happen. We don't need to try to set up a situation where a child's going to feel stressed. It's going to happen when they're, want to be the line leader or pick the wrong straw or whatever it is that's happening in their lives. It's never anything that an adult has to create the situation where it's going to happen. And we all know as parents, it's pretty constant these days that there's something that may or may not set them off. And as I said, no life is without stress. The goal is never, we don't need to try to be helicopter parents to prevent anything bad from ever happening. We don't need to bulldoze, the world before them, because clearly, as we can see now, there's always going to be, negative things in the world, that our job as parents isn't to remove all obstacles, but to help give them the tools and experiences that shows them that they can cope with these things. And a big key to that is that we have to figure it out first for ourselves. And that's probably the hardest part. Now I have to go to the next slide. Okay, Tatiana.
Yeah, this is the research that that really focuses on the three types of stress that Alana just talked about. I love the sciencey part of it. I think that that's what's fascinating to me, is that there's scientific proof, right, that there are measurable amounts of neurons that are overproduced in children who have prolonged exposure to stresses. We're not talking about tantrums that last like a half hour. We're talking about repeated hours-long tantrums on a daily basis, reoccurring, like Lana said, really prolonged. So that's the toxic kind of stress. And I think understanding that it truly changes the physical nature of the brain, that there can be an underproducing of neurons in certain areas of the brain that are responsive to control, and it can be overproducing in neurons in areas that are high anxiety or conducive to fear, so that they don't are as resilient the next time that a fear comes, or it takes them longer to overcome a fear. These kinds of stressors that happen over time on a short-term basis can have those positive effects, like Alana was saying. These positive stressors of short periods of time, of understanding that your kids are allowed to be stressed. They're allowed to freak out for a little bit. Working through it is the important thing. And making sure to be there as a support system. This research that Alana's brought up right now, really the overall theme throughout it is that supportive adults are the key to a child being able to experience even tolerable stress, which was that middle level. Being able to persevere through that is highly focused on supportive adults being nearby, even within close proximity. So if a child is needing space, for example, because a lot of our kids just need space sometimes, still being physically present or being physically nearby can provide that support that can transition them from a stress being tolerable to being a positive stress. Which I think really, I mean, we know sometimes this is kind of preaching to the choir, and not everything is always doable all the time. A lot of this stuff is what would idealistically happen. Sometimes there's reality also, and I know that it's not always possible. But if possible, to be presently around them, really this article focuses a lot on that support that the adults give.
I just want to make one point that I should have before. Sorry, Tatiana.
Yeah, go ahead.
The toxic stress and like poo, but the true issues that happen from toxic stress are not, hopefully not taking place in a lot of the homes in our community, but it's, true adversity, abuse, neglect, real disasters, loss of life and things like that. So toxic stress and like real adverse childhood experiences, mental illness.
Those are definitely things I would put things in the toxic category. I know another point that this research focused on was that the tolerable stress section, the things that are happening during that tolerable stress that the child is experiencing, that prolonged is considered toxic stress. So it can be the same situation necessarily, but shortening the amount of time based on the support that's given is what moves it from being able to be not only a tolerable stress, but a positive stress that the children can gain resiliency out of. An interesting point that this research mentioned also was a common misconception that infants and young children are too young to be affected by significant stresses that are affecting the family overall, which we know, contrary to many different studies that are also in this. We're happy to send this also to anyone that's interested. that contrary to many of these human studies and with infants and children, that they absolutely have serious disruptions in their environment that lead to neurohormonal and neurobehavioral changes that have adverse effects on their memory and on their learning and on their behavior. Um, so really putting a heavy focus on the fact that there is no, well, they're too young, they can't hear me, they can't understand. That is really something that has been proven to be untrue, and that creating that important environment for them is really key. That was mine for this one. I think the next article also talks a little bit about that. Alana, if you have the next article up.
I didn't get that one. I was like trying really hard to get this image up.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I'll send you guys the next article I wanted to bring up also. But the other article that I wanted to speak about, it referenced a dam that broke in Virginia, and the entire town was flooded and people were left homeless.
Oh, that's what this article is, yeah.
Oh, that's this one. Oh, wait. Oh, then the other, oh, this is the PTSD one. Yes. Okay. So the things we just spoke about was a different article that I will send. This is the one I was talking about. Yes. So can you please get out? Sorry. So this article that talks about a dam that broke in this town in Virginia, where the children were left with having to be displaced from their homes, and there was adverse effects in school. It looked at long-term PTSD symptoms, and as they were seen throughout different ages after this disaster, which is a smaller scale than what we're looking at now. But like Alana said, the only way that we can prepare to support further is by looking back onto research and pulling from that. One of the major conclusions of this research talked about how the level of awareness and exposure that the child had direct connections to the PTSD symptoms. Specifically, it looked at age. So it looked at children as young as infancy all the way through teenage years, I believe. And the older they were, the more they were able to understand what was happening and comprehend the heightened situation, these levels of stress. They had displayed more symptoms of PTSD. The younger the children were, not necessarily because they were young, but because of the situation, or the, how should I phrase it, or because they were sheltered more from the information because of their youth, it led them to being less aware and therefore having less post-traumatic stress symptoms.
Yeah, and the article here, my notes from that are that the predictors of PTSD aren't necessarily the effect of the disaster, but demographics. Obviously, you're in a better state depending on your socioeconomic status, and also parental functioning was a big point. So parents, we already know this, but it all kind of rests on our shoulders. And what piles of research have told us is that the way that children get out of negative experiences is with positive connection and attachment to caring, sustaining relationships with their caregivers, family atmosphere, and parental functioning. There was a really funny article, research about Israelis and how Israelis feel best prepared for a natural disaster. And that feeling of preparedness intrinsically makes them better prepared to handle a natural disaster. Because Israelis are like, I got it, it's fine. And they're trained for it, right? A lot of them have been in the army, but that sort of sense of strong sense of self, that they know that they can handle it. The same that we know, like when someone's holding a newborn, if you kind of act like you know what you're doing, you're probably going to be okay. And children and infants even, they know when you're uneasy about it. And the best thing that we can do for our kids right now is let them know that they're safe and cared for, and that we, as their adults and caregivers, we may not know everything about the future, but we know that we're going to keep them safe and allow them to continue to be children. So that's a little bit of my review of what we've learned in some of our research. And Tatiana loves to go deeper into a lot of that
I
stuff.
do. Well, I mean, I was a biology major for 2 years in college before I switched to teaching. I wanted to teach high school science. So science is like my thing. I love this kind of stuff. I think it's fascinating. I think that understanding the physical changes that happen in our children when they go through these kinds of stresses makes us more aware of bringing those happy times just so much more often. Definitely making sure that like the news is not on in front of them as often as possible. I know that like we talked about that when we were talking about this article that's on the screen now, because this dam breaking in Virginia happened in the 70s. And it's even applicable to, I'm sure, this article that Rachel mentioned in the New York Times about Alaska in the 60s, that at these times, there was not the level of exposure that children have to technology now, that they hear the news and they hear people talking about it more often. And I think being hyper aware of that, really connecting it to how it physically affects your children can change how we speak about it. And maybe even that changes how we feel, because then we're not talking about it as much. And maybe our level of stress goes down. And it's the oxygen mask thing, right? You can't take care of someone else until you take care of yourself first. And all of this research has done nothing but only prove that you have to be able to be calm and be able to provide a calm environment for your children so that they don't experience this on a long-term basis, now that we know that we're going to be here for so long.
Yeah. So I'm just I'm gonna email out the information.
Yeah, I'll send you the links to the articles and everything.
The articles, and then one of my favorite websites is the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard. This link, I'll click on that in a sec. And this is Yale University has, this is about emotional intelligence. It's a great resource. But Center, can you still see what I'm clicking?
Yes. And
Okay.
while you click on it and it loads, if you're going to click on it right now, I wanted to mention real quick, because I know people often talk, right, about all this Zoom stuff and how they feel like their kids aren't getting anything out of it. And even if they're not necessarily speaking with their friends, but hearing their friends' voices and having that small connection, there was a meta study that came out of Harvard that we studied in our program, I think a year or two ago. And it spoke about hundreds of thousands of people that were asked questions about their quality of life towards the end of their life and what made them the most happy and fulfilled. And the majority of people said their friendships, and that friendships was the most important thing to them. And it was so significant to hear that these, even if you don't think they're getting anything out of it, just hearing their friends' voices might be making a real difference in something that has been proven long term through real research to have positive effects on our kids' lives.
Yes. That research talks about in old age too, and how
they looked at everyone when they were older. It was really nice.
as adults need supportive adult friendships, which easier said than done, but it's important. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing, but I'm gonna email you all of this because this guy, he's like a superstar, Jack Shonkoff. He and my father-in-law are colleagues, but he's my favorite.